Good morning. This is Arlan Suderman, Chief Commodities Economist at StoneX, coming to you from the trading floor at about 9 a.m. on this Monday, June the 16th. A couple of things I wanted to talk about this morning. And the first is to follow up again on what we're seeing between Israel and Iran. And the second of which is the biofuel program, the blending mandates that were released by the EPA on Friday after being approved by the Office of Management and Budget. So let's dig into them. First of all, on Israel's strike on Iran, we continue to see the two sides trading strikes back and forth through the weekend. Israel was able to focus on military and nuclear sites in the initial phases of this and have significant effect. They were able to achieve air neutrality, or superiority, I should say, which means they basically can fly at will over Iran to hit their targets. We all tend to think of Iran and Israel as being about that far apart, just very close on the map, but in reality, we're talking about 1,000 miles roughly that Israeli planes have to travel in order to make the strikes if they're using aircraft in order to do so. But they've been continuing these strikes. Iran has been retaliating back. They first sent about 100 drones back at Israel late last week, early in the weekend. And Israel is pretty much able to take care of those drones with their air defenses with minimal type of damage at Israel. But then Iran really started overwhelming Israel's defense mechanism, their Iron Dome system, as well as the David slingshot system, etc., with waves of missiles, including intercontinental ballistic missiles. Now, there are reports that Jordan and Saudi Arabia helped Israel in trying to shoot down these missiles as they were coming over their airspace. We also saw that Israel was able to shoot down quite a few of them, but basically it looks like about 20% of them were able to get through, and those that were able to get through seem to be targeting civilian apartment buildings, etc. So a civilian trying to cause civilian casualties. And that greatly angered Israel. And so reports are that Israel then targeted a fuel depot near Tehran to send a message: you quit targeting our civilians, or we'll take out your energy infrastructure, which is essentially your entire economy. There are also reports that it took out natural gas infrastructure that is used primarily for domestic use. But a big part of that domestic use is the production of fertilizer, urea, as well as ammonia, anhydrous ammonia. I talked about on Friday the significance of that on the world export market at a time when we also saw Egypt shut down production because Israel had preemptively shut down its natural gas fields offshore that were supplying Egypt. And we're also seeing a major nitrogen fertilizer plant in Russia still shut down after Ukrainians strike about 10 days ago or so. And so that's not a direct necessary. We did see fertilizer prices surge on Friday, but that was more in response of fear and risk on type of a situation. We're primarily past the planting season here in the United States. And it's not that the United States is directly dependent on those supplies, but it does affect the world balance sheet. And so this is something to keep an eye on regarding overall fertilizer supply in the world. From an energy standpoint, we saw crude oil prices pull back today because thus far we have not seen Iran retaliate by shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, or as it's previously promised, if its energy infrastructure was attacked, that it would attack energy infrastructure in other regional countries. And to this point, it has not done so. Has it lost the will to do so? Has it lost the capability to do so? Is it simply waiting for the right opportunity? We do not know that. We have not seen major strikes by the proxy groups or other sleeper cells yet either. Have they been weakened sufficiently not to? Or is that still coming as well? We do not know that, but there's a little bit of an easing of the risk. Therefore, we saw the VIX pull back below 20 this morning overall, and the market's feeling a little bit more comfortable there for now while waiting for the next headline. Now, we do have the Federal Reserve meeting this week. Do not expect any change in policy at this point, although the markets will be really listening to the comments of Fed members as they start to make public appearances, and particularly Fed Chair Jerome Powell as he goes before the media a half hour after the statement is released this afternoon. But overall, the Fed is still in a position where they don't have the data points that they're looking to for guidance on changing their key interest rates. Inflation generally coming in good thus far. A big part of that is because energy prices have been declining. That's certainly going to change for the month of June, it now appears like, when the June inflation data comes out in July. But for now, we're not seeing that. There are some concerns about a softening jobs market, but again, the specific data points that the Fed tends to point to, I don't think are going to kick it into gear with a rate cut yet. Probably nothing before September, if then. But I mentioned also the biofuel program that we saw the mandates released by the EPA was on Friday. And generally, the EPA switched its system from mandating gallons, billions of gallons, to billions of RINs. RINs are those renewable identification numbers that they get for each gallon that is blended. And for ethanol, for example, it's basically about 1 RIN per gallon. And so it stayed at about 15 billion gallons slash RINs. But for the biofuel, the advanced biofuels like biodiesel, renewable diesel, the biomass diesels, it's a much higher value, like 1.6. They changed their formula from 1.7 to 1.6. But again, anything made with foreign feedstock gets about half the value. And the same is true for ethanol as well. We have California importing Brazilian ethanol because they believe that U.S. based it. If the U.S. produced ethanol requires Brazilian farmers to destroy rainforests, so they're going to buy it from Brazil instead. So try to make that logic. It just doesn't follow through, but that's the reality of it. So there'll be less RINs generated by imported ethanol and less RINs generated by imported feedstock. So, whereas previously the biomass diesel production mandate or blending mandate was 3.35 billion gallons, that has now been changed to RINs. And for the fiscal 2026 that starts October 1st, it'll be 7.12 billion RINs. Now, the EPA assumed in all of this that we would be looking at a similar mix of 40 to 45% of the feedstock being foreign imported feedstock that goes into producing biomass diesel. And so they calculated out that this would translate into an estimated 5.61 billion gallons, up from 3.35 billion this year. The question is, will that mix stay the same? If you run through the numbers right now, if it generally, there's about a 17-cent penalty because of the lower RIN value from imported feedstock, 17-cent disadvantage for using imported feedstock versus using domestic feedstock. And so we believe that there may actually be some changing of how the feedstock is traded on the cash market to where we pull more of the domestic feedstock into biofuel production, biomass diesel production, and the nation's domestic food industry relies more on imported oils to meet their demand and meet their needs. And if you used 100% domestic feedstock, it'd be about 4.61 billion gallons, so about a billion gallons less. Now, if that were the case, we still believe that that is very bullish for demand for cash soy oil as well as canola oil. Keep in mind, though, we're probably not going to be 100% domestic either. That's probably not going to be practical from a supply standpoint, at least initially. So it's probably somewhere in between there. And so it's still seen as favorable. We still need to hear about what the small refinery exemptions are. Applications are about 18 billion gallons across the fuel spectrum of biofuels. That's about a tenth of our total production. So that's a significant number. We hope to start hearing more from the EPA on that soon. And the third component being the 45Z, which is the funding mechanism, which has to get through Congress. That was in the House version, was generally favorable for the biofuels. It's now in the Senate. We hope to hear what the Senate has done with it by the 4th of July holiday weekend. So that's our story today for both the Israeli strike on Iran and the status of that right now, as well as some mention of the Federal Reserve, and then the biofuel program as we have it now overall. So we're seeing the soybean oil continue higher today on that biofuel program supporting soybeans. The grains are pulling back weaker again, at least to start off the day overall. Energy prices are also pulling back, crude oil prices pulling back somewhat as well, because we didn't see a major escalation over the weekend that would affect energy. I'll be back with you as there are more updates to give. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to continue to receive these updates from the trading floor. Thank you.